Mandated Reporting, a guide for Kansas educators, brought to you by Greenbush, the Southeast Kansas Education Service Center. Course objectives: define abuse and neglect, identify potential physical, emotional, and behavioral indicators of abuse and/or neglect, special considerations for virtual learning environments, identify individuals required to report abuse and neglect by Kansas reporting law, identify necessary information required to make a report, define reason to suspect, identify reporting formats, outline violations and immunity for mandated reporters. According to the Kansas Department of Children and Families, or DCF, child abuse is any physical injury, physical neglect, emotional injury, or sexual act inflicted upon a child. Abuse is differentiated and further defined by the Kansas statutes annotated. Physical abuse, infliction of physical harm or the causation of a child's deterioration, and may include, but shall not be limited to, maltreatment or exploiting a child to the extent the child's health is endangered. Both physical and behavioral indicators of child abuse may be evident. Physical indicators should be considered based on inconsistent medical history, the child's developmental state, and the presence of other indicators if known. Pictured here are common physical and behavioral indicators of physical abuse. This is a list of common indicators and is not all-inclusive, as there could be other indicators present. Sexual abuse. Sexual abuse is any contact or interaction with a child in which the child is being used for the sexual stimulation of the perpetrator, the child, or another person. Sexual abuse shall include, but is not limited to, allowing, permitting, or encouraging a child to be photographed, filmed, or depicted in obscene or pornographic material, or subjected to aggravated human trafficking, if committed in whole or in part for the purpose of the sexual gratification of the offender or another. Contact solely between children shall meet the criteria only if the contact also involves force, intimidation, difference in maturity, or coercion. It is important to note the physical symptoms listed above are not typically seen in young children and would be difficult to explain by any other cause than sexual abuse. Harm caused by sexual abuse is not always observable. Therefore, special attention should be paid to behavioral indicators. Emotional abuse is the infliction of mental or emotional harm or the causing of a deterioration of a child, and may include, but is not limited to, maltreatment or exploiting a child to the extent the child's health or emotional well-being is endangered. This term may include any act, behavior, or omission that impairs or endangers a child's social or intellectual functioning. This term also may include the following: terrorizing a child by creating a climate of fear or engaging in violent or threatening behavior toward the child or toward others in the child's presence that demonstrates a flagrant disregard for the child. Emotionally abandoning a child by being psychologically unavailable to the child, demonstrating no attachment to the child, or failing to provide adequate nurturance of the child. And corrupting a child by teaching or rewarding the child for unlawful, antisocial, or sexually mature behaviors. Emotional abuse or maltreatment is a consistent, chronic behavior by an adult that has a harmful effect on the child. It involves a pattern of attitudes or acts that are detrimental to the child's development of a sound and healthy personality. Emotional abuse, as defined here, seriously impairs the child's social, emotional, or intellectual functioning. The physical indicators are not always common in emotional abuse. However, there are many behavioral indicators that can be presented by the child and adult abuser. The list is of common indicators and is again not all-inclusive. Neglect is separated into 3 types: physical neglect, medical neglect, and lack of supervision. Physical neglect is the acts or omissions by a parent, guardian, or person responsible for the care of a child, resulting in harm to the child, or presenting a likelihood of harm, and the acts or omissions are not due solely to the lack of financial means of the child's parents or other custodian. This term may include, but shall not be limited to, failure to provide the child with food, clothing, or shelter necessary to sustain the life or health of the child. Medical neglect is the act or omissions by a parent, guardian, or person responsible for the care of a child, resulting in harm to a child, or presenting a likelihood of harm, and the acts or omissions are not due solely to the lack of financial means of the child's parents or other custodian. This term may be including the following, but shall not be limited to: failure to use resources available to treat a diagnosed medical condition if such treatment will make a child substantially more comfortable, reduce pain and suffering, or correct or substantially diminish a crippling condition from worsening. A parent legitimately practicing religious beliefs who does not provide specified medical treatment for a child because of religious beliefs shall not for that reason be considered a negligent parent. Lack of supervision is the acts or omission by a parent, guardian, or person responsible for the care of a child resulting in harm to a child, or presenting the likelihood of harm, and the acts or omissions are not due solely to the lack of financial means of the child's parents or other custodian. This term may include the following, but shall not be limited to: failure to provide adequate supervision of a child, or to remove a child from a situation which requires judgment or actions beyond the child's level of maturity, physical condition, or mental abilities, and that results in bodily injury or a likelihood of harm to the child. Abandonment is further defined to forsake, desert, or cease providing care for the child without making appropriate provisions for substitute care. Note, for each type of neglect, there is emphasis placed on differentiating between neglect and lack of financial means. Poverty is not equal to neglect. Possible indicators of neglect. Note, both physical and behavioral indicators are present for neglect, as they were for physical, sexual, and emotional abuse. Reason to suspect simply means any time anyone believes, has a hint or a clue a child is or has been a victim of abuse or neglect, a report can be made. A reporter may have reason to suspect when there is a discrepant or inconsistent history in explaining a child's injury. Consider whether description of how the injury occurred seems likely. If the injury is accidental, there should be a reasonable explanation of how it happened that is consistent with the severity, type, and location of the injury. When the description of how the injury occurred and the appearance of the injury do not seem related, there is cause for a reason to suspect. A report based on reason to suspect also means the law does not require proof that abuse or neglect has actually occurred or that the reporter witnessed the incident in question. A reporter's suspicion may result from an incident the reporter witnessed, a child's disclosure, or third-party information. Once a mandated reporter is aware of any information that causes a reason to suspect, the reporter is mandated by law to report the concerns. Further, a reporter is relieved of the need to make a final determination of whether or not child abuse or neglect actually occurred. Reporting is a request for an assessment into the condition of the child. The determination of whether abuse or neglect has actually occurred is the responsibility of DCF or appropriate law enforcement agencies. Mandated reporters are required to report child abuse or neglect under the Kansas reporting law. Section C outlines those in a school or other similar setting who are listed as mandated reporters in the Kansas reporting law. Teachers, school administrators, or other employees of an educational institution which the child is attending, and persons licensed by the Secretary of Health and Environment to provide child care services or the employees of persons so licensed at the place where the child care services are being provided to the child. Making a report. Reports of suspected child abuse or neglect should be made to the Kansas Protection Report Center, or, if the child has serious injuries or is in immediate danger, to the appropriate law enforcement agency. The Kansas Protection Report Center can be called 24 hours per day, 7 days per week, and may be reached from any location. Reports are referred to the appropriate local office to be investigated. If the DCF office is closed, Kansas Protection Report Center staff immediately refer emergencies to local law enforcement agencies. Reports of abuse and neglect in a DCF institution, such as a state hospital, should be made to the DCF agency or the Attorney General's office at the following number. Reports of DCF employees as alleged perpetrators should be made to local law enforcement agencies. Kansas law requires that these types of cases not be investigated by DCF. A report may be made orally or in writing. Oral reports may require a written report upon request. When reporting a suspicion that a child may be in need of care, the reporter shall disclose protected health information freely and cooperate fully with the agency and law enforcement throughout the investigation and any subsequent legal process. See the listed options for reporting in the state of Kansas via telephone, fax, email, mail, and the online reporting system. This image outlines the online reporting system. Note the required fields listed throughout the report, beginning with the top of the page, which will ask you to input whether the incident happened to a child or adult. This portion is required to fill out any more information in the report. It should be noted that the report has a timeout after 60 minutes. If you have not completed the report at this time, all information will be lost and you will be required to restart the form. Please be sure that you offer yourself plenty of time to complete the form in one sitting. All reports shall include the following information: the name and address of the child's parents or other individuals responsible for the child's care, the child's location, the child's condition, including the nature and extent of the child's injury, whether the alleged perpetrator has access to the child, any other information that the reporter believes might be helpful in showing the cause of the injuries or the extent to which the child might be in danger. As seen on the previous slide, the online report lists the reporter's name and phone number as required elements. However, reporters can make a report anonymously. If the reporter desires to remain anonymous, reporting through another medium may be advised. Seek advice from your local DCF agency to determine what the best form of report might be. It is important to remember that mandated reporters are not investigators and simply may not have a great deal of information to provide. Simply report on the information you do have, including the suggestions listed here: who, what, where, and when. Reporters should avoid interviewing the child to gain additional information. Violations. Failure of a mandated reporter to make a report is a crime that could result in a $1,000 fine or up to 6 months in jail. Some agencies may expect staff to discuss abuse situations with their supervisor before reporting. However, if a staff member believes a report of child abuse or neglect needs to be made to DCF or law enforcement, it is the responsibility of the staff member to report, whether or not the supervisor is in agreement. Employers are prohibited from imposing sanctions on employees making report or cooperating in investigations. 3 violations are listed. Willful and knowing failure to make a report required by this section is a Class B misdemeanor. It is not a defense that another mandatory reporter made a report. Intentionally preventing or interfering with the making of a report required by this section is a Class B misdemeanor. Any person who willfully and knowingly makes a false report pursuant to this section, or makes a report that such person knows lacks factual foundation, is guilty of a Class B misdemeanor. Immunity from liability. Kansas law provides immunity from liability to all mandated reporters. A reporter cannot incur any civil liability if required to participate in court proceedings as a witness. Additional considerations. If the situation is an emergency or requires an immediate response, call the police, then follow up with a DCF report. If you have firsthand knowledge, then you need to report. Even if it is multiple people who have firsthand information, each person is mandated to report. Avoid interviewing the child. Avoid leading questions. Children can be victims of sexual exploitation by use of electronic media, including cell phones, videos, email, internet, etc. Keep in mind the difference between poverty and neglect. Congratulations! You have completed the mandated reporting course. Please see the last slide for references and additional resources.